In the early 1800s, Americans drank a lot, and the damage stopped looking like a personal choice. Workplaces lost time, families lost money, violence and neglect followed heavy drinking, and communities paid the price. Alcohol flowed through daily life because it was cheap and common, even safer than some water supplies. But as towns grew and the economy changed, the costs became harder to ignore. The question shifted from taste to danger. Out of that pressure, the first organized temperance crusades formed. Ministers, reformers, and local leaders began treating drinking like a public emergency. They gathered names, held meetings, and built societies meant to change behavior on purpose, not by accident. This was not yet a national law movement. It was persuasion, reputation, and social pressure. Still, the message landed. Alcohol did not only hurt the drinker, it weakened the whole community. Temperance campaigns reframed alcohol as a moral problem the nation had to solve. Moderation started to sound like surrender because many people saw no safe line once addiction took hold. Reformers pushed for pledges, public commitments, and the idea that respectable citizens avoided strong drink entirely. That created a new kind of conflict. One side defended pravichka and tradition. The other treated alcohol as an enemy, and the fight started to organize itself. By the mid-1800s, temperance stopped being only sermons and pledges. It became organizing. In 1874, women in towns across the country stepped into the fight directly, praying, petitioning, and pressuring saloon owners to shut their doors. That wave fed a new national force, the Woman's Christian Temperance Union. It treated alcohol as a public enemy tied to poverty and domestic abuse, and it built chapters that could mobilize fast. The WCTU did not just ask people to drink less. It aimed at the rules that protected drinking. It trained speakers, raised money, and pushed school lessons that warned children about alcohol's damage. It also linked temperance to voting power, arguing that women needed the ballot to defend their homes. Local victories started stacking up into a pattern. Dry candidates won town offices, counties passed restrictions, and saloons became political targets, not just moral ones. Then, the movement gained a sharper weapon. In the 1890s, the Anti-Saloon League appeared and acted like a modern political machine. It cared less about personal reform and more about results at the ballot box. It tracked legislators, punished opponents, and rewarded allies, regardless of party. Ministers, church networks, and donors fed it names and leverage. What began as neighborhood pressure turned into coordinated strategy, pushing dry laws from state houses toward Washington. In the 1910s, temperance no longer looked like a local fight over neighborhood saloons. It became a national question. The country moved toward war, and reformers tied alcohol to discipline, waste, and national strength. They argued that grain belonged in bread, not in beer, and that sober workers meant higher production. The message landed because it sounded practical, not just moral. Washington began to listen. World War I reshaped the argument even more. Many of the biggest brewers had German roots, and anti-immigrant feeling rose fast. Temperance leaders pushed a simple claim: the saloon served foreign influence, not American values. Beer got framed as the enemy's drink. Saloons got framed as places where loyalty weakened. That turned a personal habit into a patriotic test. It also gave Congress political cover to act. With that pressure, dry forces gained federal momentum. Wartime restrictions already limited alcohol and normalized the idea that Washington could control it. Each new rule made the next step easier. The Anti-Saloon League and its allies treated brewers as a threat that had to be removed, not regulated. By the end of the decade, a constitutional ban stopped sounding impossible. It sounded like national defense. The stage for prohibition stood ready. By 1919, the fight finally reached the Constitution. The 18th Amendment passed, and it banned the making, selling, and transporting of alcohol across the United States. It sounded clear, like a switch being flipped, but the amendment did not explain the details, and it did not erase the country's appetite overnight. It created a new national rule, and it demanded a new kind of policing to match it. Those details arrived with a federal law called the Volstead Act, passed in 1919 and enforced in 1920. It defined what intoxicating meant and laid out penalties, giving the ban teeth. From that moment, a brewery, a saloon, and a shipment of whiskey all became evidence of a crime. Legal businesses faced a hard choice: shut down, shift to other products, or take the risk of breaking the law. But one fact refused to change. People still wanted alcohol, for habit, for celebration, for relief, for tradition. So prohibition did not end drinking. It changed where drinking happened and who controlled the supply. A product that had been ordinary now carried a criminal markup. Every bottle now required secrecy, and a gap opened up between the law on paper and the reality in daily life. In the early 1920s, the country faced a basic problem. The ban existed on paper, but the people meant to enforce it stayed too few and too poorly funded. Federal agents covered huge territories with limited staff, limited training, and limited support. Smugglers and illegal sellers learned that the odds of getting caught stayed low. Prohibition did not fail everywhere at once. It failed unevenly, and that unevenness shaped everything that followed. That weakness opened the door to corruption. With so much money at stake, bribes did not stay rare. Some officers looked the other way, some warned targets ahead of raids, and some became partners in the trade they were supposed to stop. Courts and local politicians also influenced what got prosecuted and what quietly disappeared. Enforcement started to depend on who you knew, where you lived, and how much you could pay. The law became negotiable. Then the loopholes did the rest. Alcohol still flowed through legal channels labeled medicinal, sacramental, or industrial. Doctors wrote prescriptions for whiskey. Churches received wine, and factories handled strong alcohol for products that had nothing to do with drinking. Each exception created a route for diversion and resale. Ordinary citizens noticed the gaps and learned to exploit them. When a law felt selective and easy to dodge, breaking it started to feel normal. By the early 1920s, the problem stopped looking like scattered law-breaking and started acting like a business. Speakeasies multiplied because customers kept coming, and owners needed a steady, predictable supply. That demand pulled alcohol distribution out of back rooms and into organized routes, schedules, and middlemen. The goal was simple: keep the drink flowing while keeping names, locations, and shipments hidden from raids. Bootlegging networks tightened into chains, and each link learned its job. Some people sourced liquor from Canada and the Caribbean. Others moved it through rivers, roads, and rail lines, and others washed it through fake paperwork. Money made the system smarter. Payoffs to police, judges, and city officials turned risk into routine. Secrecy became a skill, not an accident, and corruption became part of the price of doing business. But professionalism also raised the stakes. When a shipment vanished or a rival tried to take a route, the courts offered no protection because the product stayed illegal. Disputes got settled privately. Threats replaced contracts, and weapons replaced receipts. Violence did not appear because people drank. It grew because an entire market operated outside the law. Prohibition did not erase alcohol. It moved it into an underworld that got paid to fight. By the mid-1920s, bootlegging stopped looking like scattered hustles and started acting like an industry. The profits were too big to leave unguarded. Gangs moved from selling alcohol to controlling entire supply chains, import routes, warehouses, trucks, and the bars that served it. Territory became a business asset, and it had to be defended. Bribes bought breathing room, but guns settled the arguments that money could not. As crews fought for neighborhoods, something else happened at the top: consolidation. Smaller operators got absorbed, pushed out, or killed, and the winners ran their cities like markets. They formed syndicates that coordinated with partners in other places, linking Canadian liquor, coastal smuggling, and inland distribution into a single pipeline. The violence shocked people, but it also sent a message. The underworld did not just survive Prohibition, it grew organized. In Chicago, one name came to represent that new order: Al Capone. He did not invent bootlegging, but he mastered it at scale, using cash to buy loyalty, intimidation to keep rivals back, and corruption to soften law enforcement. His organization turned illegal alcohol into a steady revenue stream, and that money financed more muscle, more influence, and more control. Prohibition created a contradiction. A popular demand funded criminal power. By the end of the 1920s, the country did not just feel tired of Prohibition. It felt threatened by what it had created. Gang wars stopped looking like distant criminal feuds and started reading like public emergencies. Newspaper headlines treated shootings and bombings as proof that the law had not ended drinking. It had changed who controlled it, and now the cost came in blood. Then came the incidents everyone remembered. In Chicago, the St. Valentine's Day Massacre in 1929 showed how far the violence reached when rival crews fought for the same illegal profits. 7 men died in minutes, and the details spread fast. For many Americans, that moment clarified something uncomfortable. Prohibition did not weaken organized crime. It gave it a business worth killing for. That outrage might have remained only anger if the economy had not collapsed. After the 1929 crash, the Great Depression squeezed governments at every level. Tax revenue shrank, relief costs rose, and enforcement budgets looked impossible to defend. Legal alcohol suddenly meant more than personal freedom. It meant jobs, licensing fees, and tax money. Repeal stopped sounding radical. It started sounding practical. In 1933, the country finally reversed itself. The 21st Amendment passed, and it did one clear thing. It ended the national ban by cancelling the 18th Amendment. That legal switch happened fast, but its meaning was bigger than a single vote. Overnight, millions of Americans were no longer criminals for buying a drink. The federal government stepped back, and the real fight moved to the states. States had to build a new system almost from scratch. Some chose tight control, creating state-run liquor stores and licensing boards designed to limit sales and collect taxes. Others allowed private businesses again, but with permits, rules, and inspectors. Hours, age limits, advertising, and where alcohol could be sold all became tools of regulation. The goal changed. It was no longer about banning drinking. It was about managing it and profiting from it. For criminal enterprises, repeal removed their biggest advantage, a product everyone wanted that could not be sold legally. Bootlegging profits shrank as legal suppliers returned and prices dropped. But the underworld did not vanish. Many groups shifted into rackets that still paid, like gambling, loan sharking, and control of unions and nightclubs. Some tried to muscle into the legal alcohol trade through front businesses and bribery. The contradiction ended, but the machinery remained. When national prohibition ended, the idea behind it never fully disappeared. In the early 1800s, reformers treated drinking as a moral emergency, and that instinct stayed powerful. If a product harmed families, the law had to stop it. But the larger lesson cut the other way. Once something popular became illegal, the market did not vanish. It moved, and the methods built to fight it reshaped policing for generations. Modern enforcement carried fingerprints from that era: specialized units, informants, undercover buys, and the constant pressure to seize goods and money. Those tools had not been invented for alcohol alone, but prohibition had normalized them as everyday government work. The result had been a permanent tension. Police chased supply, while demand kept pulling it back. Corruption risks followed the money, and violence followed the territory, just as it had before. At the same time, legal alcohol became a tightly managed marketplace, built on the fear of repeating the 1920s. Licensing, taxes, age limits, and rules for where and how to sell had all treated alcohol as dangerous but governable. That framework shaped later arguments about other substances. Every new ban carried the same question prohibition had answered the hard way. Would outlawing it reduce harm, or would it create another underworld large enough to survive the law?